All righty. Again, welcome. Thank you all for making time in your schedules to be here with us. Again, my name's Pat Limbach. I serve as the VP for Research at the University of Cincinnati. And this event that you're attending, what we call our Flashpoint Series, is a part of the program that we've been doing this week at the university, which is our Research and Innovation Week, where we celebrate the various activities that occur across the university due to talented faculty that we have here in the room with us, are just some of the examples. As part of Research and Innovation Week, we've had this goal to bring together people, leaders from across the region, with experts on a panel that can share with us information. And I want to thank two key people for making this happen, because it's been a conversation piece in the Office of Research, but it hasn't been realized until today. The first is Jennifer Kervikis. So Jennifer, if you can wave your hand, Associate VP. And the second is our moderator of the panel, Jay Shabria. Thank you, Jay. And so I want to thank both of you for making this happen, all of you for being here. And Jay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Pat, appreciate it very much. Thanks for letting us do this. When Jen and I started Flashpoint about 2 years ago, Renee was actually our first panelist, and the whole idea is to bring some of this research out of the ivory tower into the community, talk about it in a way that everyone can understand it and appreciate the remarkable things that UC does. Digital Futures, really, it's all about solving problems that matter, and so many of the researchers at UC are doing just that, solving problems that are huge, but they really matter to people, and so we're thrilled to be here. The panel today, it's about confronting crisis. So when you talk about solving a problem that matters, it's how do we deal with the things that are thrust upon us, both on a community level, but things that we just don't know are coming around the bend. And our panelists here today are going to be talking about that. One of our panelists today, Teresa Flores, who was a human trafficking survivor, someone that I've gotten to know for over the last several years as we've confronted that crisis here in the States, not able to be with us. She had an emergency, so unfortunately I know she was on the menu for us to talk to. She's not going to be here today, but hopefully she'll be engaged with us and she gets better soon. With that, I'm going to do some quick introductions and we'll get straight into it. And there's going to be a portion here for Q&A from you. So as you hear what they have to say, we hope you can engage our participants too and ask them your questions. First, we got Dan Meyer. Dan is the CEO of Nehemiah Manufacturing. It's here in Cincinnati, and he's going to tell you a little bit about what they do. But from 2011, they started this amazing program to hire folks that have felonies, reintegrate them in the community, give them second chances, and it's just a remarkable thing. The crisis he's facing so many of them, from drug abuse to high recidivism rates to just helping our workforce. So we're thrilled to have you, Dan. Thank you. We have Steve Schierholt. Steve and I have known each other for a long time. He came from the Attorney General's office, and he's been a crime fighter his entire career. But then we brought him in, and he became the executive director of the State Board of Pharmacy. And he was brought in with the express purpose of fighting Ohio's opioid abuse problem. It's one of the crises around the country, and Ohio ranks, unfortunately, too high near the top. And Steve's doing everything he can to combat that. And then, of course, all of you know Dr. Neville Pinto. Dr. Pinto has been president of UC. He's the 30th president, and he's been president since 2017. Been in higher ed for 35 years. And I'm sure that you used all 35 years of those to really try to steer the university through this COVID crisis. I can't imagine what it's like to have a huge organization, something as big as UC, and you have one day there's a pandemic and you've got to steer this university through that. And he's going to talk a little bit about the decisions he had to make and lessons learned. So thank you all for being here. So look, we're going to start a little bit about how you came to your particular issue. And the first time that you realized about what this crisis was that you're dealing with, and any stories around that. So Dan, I'm gonna come to you first.
All right. Okay, this is working. First of all, thank you very much. It's a privilege and honor to be here. Nehemiah had a little bit background. I'm the president, as he said, CEO, co-founder with Tom Williams. Many of you may know Tom. But wanted to come in the inner city to make a difference, one person, one day at a time with light manufacturing. My whole career was consumer packaged goods, 15, 16 years in corporate America, Procter and others. I had a previous company that I had and I sold, and we tithed as a company. As the good Lord blessed us, we would give back to inner city ministries. And here I was at the age of 53 and said, how do you go in? Time, talent, and treasure, ask the Lord, what are we going to do next? And it was really a calling to come in the inner city to make a difference and hire those that need it most for sustainable employment. Hence the name Nehemiah. It's an Old Testament prophet called by God to rebuild Jerusalem, one stone, one brick at a time. That's what we want to do. We wanted to change the community, one person, one day at a time. And we thought sustainable employment was it. And we started working to bring folks in with City Gospel Mission, Jobs Plus or Employment Arm and Cincinnati Works. And, we're only a year into this, and a gentleman from Jobs Plus said, Dan, would you ever hire somebody with a felony? And the obvious reason why they needed that is he said, we have 2,000 people. I don't know if you know this. In Hamilton County, we got 2,000 to 2,500 people that come out of jail or prison every single year. And without sustainable employment, that's the number one reason they go back. So if we don't have that, we're spending as a community $30,000 to keep people locked up versus getting them engaged in the community and being productive. So we thought we'd give it a shot. True to our mission, help those that need it most. So we hired one, and that gentleman was unbelievable, highly productive, highly engaged, thankful to have a job. And we thought, wow, we're all in. We're going to do this. So we'd hired two, we'd hired three, we hired four. And then we'd lose them. And I didn't get it. It was like, where'd they go? No call, no show. And you begin to realize the people we're hiring, they're a flat tire away from their life spinning out of control. It could be one of their kids with earache, toothache. Mom panics, doesn't know what to do, doesn't show up, doesn't call. We lost them. And then it was, the chairman of GCB said, Dan, did you ever think about hiring a social worker? I'm a corporate guy, I know HR. I know social workers. And I said, what's the deal there? And it was, it's so much bigger than just a job. There's so many barriers when you come out of prison or jail to reenter into our community. And that was an aha moment for me. And we started with a social worker 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. And we call our employees family members, because if you think about employee, you think of somebody for 8 hours. You think about family member, you know everything about them. Trials, tribulations, their kids, what's happening. So our social workers from day one ask, what are your dreams? Where do you want to go? Where are you along this journey? What are the barriers that you walk into this building with on your heart, on your mind, that prevents you from being the best you can be? And we start removing those from day one. So I fast forward, today we're in Lower Price Hill for a reason. As you know, a very tough community. We built 172,000 square feet. We got another 50,000 coming up. We have over 200 employees, 140 are second chance, 3 full-time social workers. We promote from within. So you start day one, you might take a box at the end of a production line, put on a pallet. Well, that's our supervisors, line captains, running that shift, running entire manufacturing. We have some that come in the office, dreams that come in the office. We make that happen. And it's been transformative for the individual, their families, our community, and obviously for Nehemiah. You really create a caring culture. And we've taken that message because everybody gets a moral case, right, to help people out that really need it. But there's a business case for what we do. When you have highly engaged, productive family members, that leads to low turnover, which means a better bottom line. Our turnover rate is 15%. And that's during COVID as well. And in industry, it's 50 to 100. It costs us $3,000 on board somebody. So think about it. If we have 100 employees, we turn over 100, it's $300,000. Why not put that money into your family members? So we created the Beacon Hope Business Alliance 7 years ago, all in the spirit of amplifying that message, of hiring second chance for folks that didn't have a platform. It's great to have, if you know Tom Williams, great to have that partner. He knows everybody in this community. So we brought down from the CBC, CRBC, CEOs, chairmen, owners, one at a time. And it was transformative for them because they could see it. You know, I'd say the biggest fish that joined this thing was Kroger and Rodney McMullen. He came down. He saw what we were doing. He was inspired. They have a plant next to us on State Avenue. They had policies that said we wouldn't hire somebody with a felony, and he changed those.
So Dan, you've really focused on the community, and that's like the community to live, and that's
Yeah.
really a remarkable thing. And I want to get into some of these partnerships and the business case for it too in a bit. I think that's we'll delve into it. Steve, we'll come to you next on this. You were brought in to solve a problem that was huge. Ohio was at the time. I remember there were stories about certain counties where they didn't have enough morgue space, and and refrigerator trucks were being brought in because of all the deaths around the state. And quite frankly, we're still number 4. It's not a good number. What was your first interaction to this opioid abuse problem that we've got in the state? How did you learn about it, and how did it affect you at the time?
Well, as Jay said, I've been in law enforcement my entire adult life, starting as an 18-year-old Army military policeman in Germany during the first Cold War. Actually, my first experience with opioid addiction was buying heroin from undercover buying from GIs in Germany. I mean, and I've worked in drug enforcement off and on at the military level, at the state level, at the county level, and I'm going to give you some statistics that I'm sure maybe you've all heard, but this opioid epidemic has transformed our country, I think. In 2007 is the first year that overdose deaths exceeded motor vehicle crashes, and that number was 1,351. In 2014, which is the year I got hired by the Board of Pharmacy, the deaths were 2,531. And notably, 46, almost 50% of those were from pharmaceutical opioids. And we'll talk more about that. You know, our focus quickly became trying to stop people from starting. And we knew that overprescribing and improper prescribing led to this. Pill mills in 2014 were still active, and I'll talk more about that. But doctor shoppers. In Ohio, we define a doctor shopper. It's not a legal definition. It's a working definition for us. Is someone in one calendar month goes to 5 different prescribers, gets 5 or more, 5 different prescriptions for a controlled substance, and fills them at 5 different pharmacies. You know, you could have medical conditions and go to 5 different doctors, but you probably go to one pharmacy. And in 2014, Ohio had 900 doctor shoppers. And these people are at high risk of overdose from the pharmauticals, but also, if they can't get the pharmaceuticals, transitioning to street drugs. A controlled substance, at its basic form, you need a prescription for penicillin or other antibiotics or what have you. A controlled substance is a drug that is federally classified, state classified into one of 5 categories or schedules. And a Schedule 1 is a drug that has a high potential for abuse, but no medical use. That's LSD. Federally right now, it's marijuana and as well, but those are those drugs. Your opioids are typically a Schedule 2, which is a high potential for abuse, but there is some medical use, and it goes down to Schedule 5. So when I say controlled substance, it is the drugs that there's a high potential for abuse. So back to how I got into it, I work for the Board of Pharmacy. Actually, two members of the board are here, Jen Riddell and Jason George. Jen is a UC alum. And in 2014, we had a staff of 57 with a large law enforcement responsibility. I think the administration wanted to try something different, and they thought they were getting something different with me. Well, they were right about that in a couple ways, but and it became maybe an obsession with me, but I mean, this many people were dying in Ohio, and we had to try everything we could. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with the ORS system. It's the Ohio Automated RX Reporting System. It's Ohio's prescription drug monitoring program. Every state in the country now has one of these. Ohio's was started in 2006 as a way to track controlled substances, not your antibiotics or other maintenance medications, but controlled substances. And it was designed as a law enforcement tool and as a way to track doctor shoppers.
We'll get into that in a little bit here, Steve, because that's certainly the way in which you're tackling this, so I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Dr. Pinto, 2 years ago, we all were watching the news, and we saw when the state got locked down. You run this huge organization that so many people here are affiliated with. I really want to get inside your head and try to think about what you thought about, not just from the personal side, but as the leader of UC, how you were going to approach this and what your first reactions were when COVID hit.
Well, thank you, Jay. And first, before I respond to the question, just want to say it's an honor to be up here with two gentlemen, Dan and Steve, for the important and inspirational work you guys are doing. Just terrific. My job seems easy compared to the challenges that you're facing, but it's very, very important work. Well, what was I feeling like when COVID came? I can just give you this visual. I have to tell you this first. I realized quickly in a crisis, there's no clear starting point. It sort of creeps up on you, and you better be prepared when it hits you with a full force. So, but I can give you this visual. Once we had, and I don't remember the date exactly, March 13th, when we decided we had to, that was the day actually we had the first cases identified in our region of COVID. So we knew it was creeping. You remember Ohio, it started in Cleveland with 3 cases, and then it came to Cincinnati on March 13th. It's time to think primarily of the safety of our community, our campus community. That became the crisis. And I do remember, I have an office up that has a good view of the university, has a balcony. And March 13th, we decided we were going to close down. And a couple of days later, I was in my office, and there was essentially no one on campus. And you have to understand, I've been in academia actually 37 years. I have never been on any campus that I was associated with where there was ever a situation, no matter what day of the year you are, where there's nobody on campus. And I was out on the balcony. I was literally there standing for 30 minutes. I didn't see a soul. There was one, toward the end of it, that 30-minute period, I saw a UC police officer on a bicycle with his helmet slowly moving down the hill. And that's how I remember the start of COVID. Wow. It's just, and there I was, responsible now for delivering on a mission that required primarily physical contact between people. I mean, proximity, not contact, but physical proximity between people. It was an overwhelming sort of moment. So that was the start of COVID for the university.
And we'll get a little bit into how you dealt with the first steps. Steve, I'm going to come back to you next. So all the problems that we're dealing with here are just huge. And, you talk about recidivism rates, you talk about dealing with COVID. You're dealing with one of the biggest crises the state's ever seen, where, again, we were at one point #1 in opioid overdose deaths. What were the first steps you took because I think one of the things we want to impart is lessons learned and how do we all share certain things that we did. But how did you approach the problem when you first got in, and what were the first things you did?
Well, keep in mind, I am not a patient man, and now I've worked for 2 governors, and trust me, neither of them are patient men. I might seem patient to either one of them, actually. But we had to realize, or I had to realize very quickly, that we can only control what we can control. And the opioid epidemic, with the Department of Health and Mental Health and Addiction Services, with the treatment and recovery mission that they have, are huge. But that's not our lane. And so staying in our lane was important. I talked about ORs, and this is a research body. Anybody that ever looks at the opioid epidemic, the mother lode of data is the state's prescription monitoring program data. And in Ohio, like I think every other state, it's secret. It is, if you're a healthcare professional, you can view it for treatment of a patient. If you're in law enforcement in Ohio, you can look at it, but only for purposes of a specific case. And the Board of Pharmacy is required by Ohio law to examine the data for trends and that type of thing. And we did that, but we knew that we had to share information from that database with health, with Medicaid, with mental health and addiction services, and we started picking low-hanging fruit off. One of the first things we did is, and I think it was the 2014 data we looked at in 15, is look at the decedents that had died in 14 and compare their names with the ORS data to identify. The thought was, are there doctors that are that are engaged in drug trafficking wearing the white coat? And we did that, and to our surprise, there were 2 Ohio physicians that had 12 patients that died in that preceding year, 12 each. And so that with my investigative background, that was a clue. So we started looking at them. One was a physician that went to jail. The other, honestly, was a dentist that just happened to be, his practice was in one of the worst areas of one of the hardest hit cities in the state, and he was treating at-risk patients. There was no evidence of drug trafficking. This ORS system, there was reluctance in using it, and so I very quickly tried to figure out why was that. One, there were no requirements to use it. Fortunately for me and the Board of Pharmacy, that was in the works. That was coming even before I got there. And the other thing is, picture you visiting your physician, and they've got their medical records on a laptop there in the room. In order to check ORS, they had to log into ORS and then input your data in there, and it could take 3 to 5 minutes. And one of the biggest things we did early on, and this was announced in October of 15, was integrating ORS into the clinical workflow at a pharmacy, at a doctor's office, at a hospital, and we were the first state in the country to do it. So that when I visit the doctor, and literally with a click of a button, because the system knows I'm there, and right before he tells me you need to lose weight, he can look at my ORS data, and it's right there. So it erased an impediment in the use of ORS. There were some requirements to use ORS. Since that time, at that time, there were about 65,000 ORS queries per day. We're now averaging 1 million ORS queries per day.
That's fantastic. So it sounds like first you assessed the problem, you got the facts, and there was a big problem with oars, and you implemented that first. The biggest crisis, the biggest issue to the crisis. Okay, Dr. Pinto, I'm going to come back to you. So you had that fateful day, and you saw that cop alone. What were those first steps you took to say, we got this crisis that's coming? How are we going to deal with it?
So it's not like we start start at the very beginning in this. So for a complex organization like ours, we have an emergency management team, a professional team that resides at the university. And while sort of this came to my attention as the only thing I would have to deal with for months, quite honestly, prior to that, our emergency management group was already monitoring this way back when the disease was in China. And the way it works is we have a group called the EMAC, which really is the advisory council for emergency management at the university, and it has representatives across the university for every possible emergency that we could think of. And also it has an operations plan that is built around that. So there's a representative, Dr. Kim Miller, actually, on University Health Services, who led University Health Services at that time, was the representative of EMAC on health emergencies. And she had identified as early as January that we've got to watch this. And in February, she activated the actions. And I think we soon realized it was going to be a level 3 emergency, which is the highest level emergency for the university, that would require, in their terms, an evacuation. So it's not like we started, I had to rebuild all this. We have a lot of experts, but we quickly had to focus, I had to focus, so let me talk about what sort of I had to think about. I had to think about the priorities that were most important to the institution, and I think they're obvious. The first one, when you're dealing with a crisis for an organization, there's various categories. It could be financial, it could be health of the employees. So it depends on what sort of, it could be a destruction of physical assets. But in this case, it was clearly health. So the focus was immediately on safety and security of our community, faculty, students, and staff, above everything else. So the first decision, actually, and so then you also were fortunate to be part of an academic health center. So we have actually experts on campus available to us, and that is I can tell you what an enormous advantage that was. Actually, one of them sitting right here, Dr. Dustin Calhoun, who you may recognize the name, actually helped our whole region. He's an expert, he's in our emergency department expert on disaster management and actually helps the whole region. So we have experts of that caliber in there. So you assemble the team of experts that you need. I mean, they come from all aspects: emergency medicine, internal medicine, infectious diseases as part of that. So all of these groups, these folks were advising us. So you rely on the experts on that question. And I think that was what helped me a great deal. So the decision to shut down the university, and then subsequently as we went through the process, it was reliance on expertise, reliance on their knowledge, and carefully listening to their advice, but also remembering that you had to, before making a decision, because it was in a period when there was not enough data to make decisions. Remember, we didn't understand this disease. We knew it was infectious, it was dangerous. That was about it, right? But beyond that, we didn't have much information. So the idea then was to use experts, consult, and then reach the decision. The second piece was continuity. All right, so those were my two top priorities. So you want to put yourself in the shoes of the student now and think about the crisis from the perspective of the individual, right? Now that's what I learned, is you have to have the perspective of the institution and you have to have the perspective of the individual. And the crisis from the perspective of the individual may be quite different. And it varies widely. We have 47,000 students. There are 47,000 perspectives. And there's 12,000 faculty and staff. They each have their own perspective. So, but our focus, our value here, or our sort of driver is a focus on the student. So that's what I focused on first. And continuity in their lives was incredibly important. So depending on, the students, some just went home. They had all the facilities to connect. They had, a gigabyte of connection from home, laptops at home. Parents were supportive, not to worry about food. Mom will cook you dinner. There were others who had no home. Correct? So we had to rally around each of these perspectives and respond to that immediately because continuity was important. They had to finish their degree on time. And you can understand sort of the variety of challenges here. For example, think about this. A senior graduating has a job offer already, right? It's March. They're finishing up their senior semester. They've got a job waiting. They can't wait to graduate. You've got to figure out how they're going to graduate. There's an accreditation requirement that says you have to finish a certain number of credits to do that. How do we manage that? And this is chaos around the country now. So medical students on their clinical rotations, what do? So you have the safety requirement, right, where you want to make sure they're safe. They're still students, but they have to finish their clinical rotations. So these were the types of questions that you have. It requires a lot of expertise, a lot of commitment, and I just have to say the commitment of our university community, our staff and our faculty, I couldn't be prouder of how they responded to this in that emergency.
So you have these disparate audiences, and that's the fascinating thing about a huge organization like this, where people think UC, it's not just some monolith, it's all these different constituencies that you have to serve. So I appreciate that perspective very much. Dan, I'm going to come to you with the same kind of concept here. So in 2011, you institute this program. You're obviously a manufacturing company. It's not UC, but you're impacting these people on a very individual basis. You don't necessarily have the large team. How are you dealing with this in the early days when you made the decision that this is something you want to tackle?
Yeah. Mr. President, wow, that I wouldn't want to bend in your shoes. That was a big undertaking. It's powerful what you guys did. We're on a much smaller scale, but the same issues. I can tell you where I was when found out everything was shutting down. Matter of fact, we were teaching a Nehemiah class at Harvard, second-year business students, and that was their last class. They were shutting down. And that weekend, we had to come together, a leadership team, and kind of figure out what we were going to do. We relied heavily on the medical community. I have a good friend, senior level. What was Christ Hospital doing? How they were thinking about this? And, as the president said, you think safety first. And then we have a lot of people that financially we need to take care of. So we were quick to adopt, the testing, the masking, social distancing, making our production lines, slowing them down, spreading people out, changing, the lunches so you only had so many people. So we were able to do that very quickly. We were very clear in what we were doing, so everybody knew what it was. From an office staff, we send most people home and for 6 weeks. There was a skeleton crew of us in the office, but we had warriors on the production line and we had warriors out in warehousing. We didn't miss a beat. We were blessed not to have many cases of this, but we were very diligent in doing those things. And, the business really was booming because we have products that consumers need. And so we were able to, survive. There was that PPP money that came out and we got some, we gave it back. We didn't need it. So we were blessed in that capacity. But, there's, in any crisis, leaders lead, managers kind of cry and whine. We had to step up and lead. And, we learned a lot, not only going through this, but it's a good time to, you kind of see chinks in the armor within the organization. And, Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. We learned a lot, and we're a much smarter, better company and moving forward and from this situation. Not that nobody wants it, but you got to deal with it. You got to learn to deal with it. And, you know, like I said, we have warriors within our organizations that showed up every day and pounded away and got product out. And we were able to keep people, you know, employed and take care of them financially.
I appreciate that very much. And if the podcast of this panel ever comes out, that's going to be the title of the podcast. Leaders lead and managers whine. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, they find excuses.
Fine,
do
excuse
whatever.
whine. So for everyone here, we're going to take questions. And I've got one more round of questions here, and I want to take some Q&A afterwards. So if you have questions, Tony and Margot, I think, are running around here, so you just grab them and we can ask a question. But before we get to that, Dr. Pinto, I'm going to come back to you. The challenges that you face, they're immense. You got mental health issues. Talk a little bit about the roadblocks to actually a successful steering of the ship through the pandemic. What were those biggest challenges that you faced that you didn't expect necessarily? And not that you expected any of it, let me be clear.
So you talked about mental health, and I'll come back to that. That's important. But I would say sort of the most troubling aspect of this crisis, from my perspective, was that it exposed sort of areas that we knew were weaknesses, not just at the university, but across our society, sort of the inequity that was made very evident in this situation. I'm ashamed to say that I would have never thought that any one of our students would not have internet access in their homes. You know, so that's my world, right? And so I was educated on this. I mean, and maybe I should have known, but I didn't. I never even occurred to me. Because these students don't complain about that. I also didn't know that there were situations where students could not go home because it's not a supportive environment. So we have, you know, so we think of them in our residence halls, and we think of them as having a campus experience, and we translate our own experiences as a student into their experiences, correct? I had a fortunate experience. Now, I had to struggle with these things when I was younger, very privileged in that way. But they did. And it was dealing with sort of the individuals and their challenges as we went through. And so now I'm just talking about the start, but then also sort of a recognition as we started to sort of fight back against the virus, you know, with, and I, you know, want to give a plug if you don't give me an opportunity, but I just want to say this before I go to my topic, because I wanted to say this at some point, I'm going to say it now.
You're the president, you can plug whatever you want.
Would we be here today if it wasn't for what science did for us, right? Just remember what research, discovery does for us as a community. If we didn't have all that talent in all our laboratories across the world, not just in this country, if we didn't have that store of knowledge that we built out, much of it at universities, would we be here today? Would we have a vaccine? I can bet you we would not, right? This thing would be at a different level of engagement. So going back to this point here that I'm making, so it was responding, I think, to the individuals, the need, and this is something also that I learned. You know, we'd gone through a process of sort of organizing ourselves around a strategic direction. Next lives here, you've seen it all over campus. But fundamentally what it means is, you know, what do we believe in as an institution? And I have this one image that I show every opportunity I get with students at the center of the university. And everything sort of supports them. So when you have a complex organization, what I realized with a crisis is that it's a very open system. So it's very subjected to forces, both internal and external, that are unpredictable, that could throw you off your direction, off your mission, and even probably stop you from delivering your mission. I mean, this is a great example, right? An external force, a virus came in, and you know, essentially brought our entire planet to its knees, correct? So, but how you respond to it depends on sort of what the core value or belief is within the university. And one of the things we've always projected is whenever we make decisions, it's about the question, is it good for the students? That's what I mean by, that's the center of our being. If students weren't there, we didn't exist. So when you're responding, if that does not permeate your culture, because it's a complex organization, it gets much more difficult to deal with a crisis. Because you're exposed at multiple levels because it's an open system, correct? So hypothetically, let's say, if I went to an online, and this did not happen, I want to be very clear, but at one point of weakness is a group of faculty decided, I'm not going to do this online, forget it, the class is canceled. Do you see what I'm saying? If they didn't believe in the student, this did not happen. Our faculty believe in delivering to their students. I just want to, so it's very important, you know, if you want to respond with maximum strength to these types of situations, that there be a core belief in complex organizations that drives that organization. If you don't have that, you're going to fall apart in a crisis.
So it's about getting buy-in at a very simple
It's
level,
more, I think,
that.
than buy-in. It's a clear understanding that this is your passion. This is why you do it. This is why your work is important.
That's very powerful.
Yeah.
Dan, I want to come use that to talk a little bit about what you're doing, because you're so passionate about giving these folks a second chance, sometimes more than a second chance, as I've read in a lot of the media. When you're trying to do a program like this, there's got to be stumbling blocks. People that don't necessarily trust these folks. I don't know what were the stumbling blocks when you instituted this program.
You know, we don't. The people that are part of Nehemiah believe in what we're doing. You know, it's a calling for what we're doing. So everybody rallies behind it. So we don't have any really internal forces that don't buy in. I do want to go back to one point, if you don't mind, of this whole mental health during this is really significant. You can only imagine the folks within the Nehemiah family. A lot of them have mental health challenges. And it was imperative that we had our antennas up on this, and we're blessed in how we do it, that we have our captains, supervisors, et cetera, on the floor. Because we've had some folks that we had to quickly intervene and get them help, because it was overwhelming to deal with the challenges, and they're real. And I can say we lost somebody in all this that went back to the drugs, and we couldn't get them in time. So in any of these situations, that whole mental health piece and being aware of that and sensitive to that. And we still get challenges here, right? I mean, anybody, as you know, you're going after it really hard, you're getting burned out. Got to be very sensitive to the mental health of the organization.
I appreciate that. Thank you, and sorry for your loss there. That's got to be really difficult. Steve, when you're tackling this statewide problem, this national epidemic of opioid abuse, what were the things that that just kept bogging you down, that you had to figure out how to overcome? And not that you're in the clear yet by any means.
Right. Actually, the COVID I think all the gains that, two things, the gains that we were making, that the Board of Pharmacy could control each year, the number of decedents from pharmaceutical opioids was going down, and then fentanyl hit. And it was a game changer.
Talk about fentanyl for a second. What exactly that is and why
Well,
it's so deadly.
it can be, it's used in surgeries and the like, but it also, what we're seeing and what's killing Ohioans and across the country is illicit fentanyl. It's a synthetic opioid that is more powerful than heroin, more powerful than morphine, and it's cheap, it's easy, and for any of you and like that have young family members, the idea of experimenting with drugs today is not the same as it was 30 years ago or what have you. There is no such thing as just experimenting with drugs because of fentanyl. It's in everything. The crime labs in Ohio have seen fentanyl in with marijuana. And and when I say they, I mean the criminals. They're putting out pills with pill presses that look like legitimate pharmaceuticals, but they're fentanyl. And they're not getting cocaine, they're getting fentanyl or things laced with fentanyl. And it is killing people right and left. So fentanyl was a game changer, and there is no experimentation. It's Russian roulette now.
So it's kind of like toothpaste, tube of toothpaste, where you stop the pill mills here, and there were huge pill mills in Ohio, and now we've got another crisis, and it just keeps spiraling.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to take some questions from the audience. If you have a question, anyone right now? We got Richard here.
Hi, Richard Harknett from the University of Cincinnati, and I'm going to be part of this building that we're putting up, Digital Futures. So I wanted to sort of take the three of your experience and sort of think out into the future, right? So as leaders who had to manage your individual moments, Steve, I was struck by a quick little data anecdote you gave us, that there were 2 doctors, right? And you had over 12,000 deaths associated with them, or something.
Well, no, just
Or 12 deaths.
12
deaths.
12
right, I'm sorry.
each.
Right, 12 each.
But seemed like
But
a lot.
parallel, right, it seems like a lot, right? One, obvious crime, other contextualized,
Right.
wasn't the case. But the data didn't separate the two initially,
Right.
right? So I'm just curious in terms of, the type of work that we're going to be doing in Digital Futures is leveraging algorithmic decision-making, right? And being able to discern patterns in such a way to hopefully take complexity, right? And make it more manageable. If there was a tool that you could have had in dealing with each one of your situations, blue skying, right? That could organize information in such a way that you didn't have, what would that tool look like?
Steve, we'll start with you.
Well, we kind of have it now, but looking back on things, I think it could have made a big difference probably back to '07 or even before. And it is using that ORS data. What we are doing now, and I get a report every month, is looking at prescribers, looking at prescriptions that are, the data is in ORS, and our ORS director, if you took, who's the #1 prescriber of opioids in Ohio, you're probably gonna get an orthopedic surgeon, just like the dentist I talked about. But our ORS director has a process where he's looking at who are in the top percentiles of opioid prescriptions, number of patients, numbers of prescriptions, and on and on and on. And what it amounts to is, if you're in the top of 5 or 6 of those, you've probably got some splaining to do. And honestly, our ORS director, Chad Garner, I'll give him a shout out. He is a computer guy. I don't want to say computer geek, but I tell people he would rather spend 30 minutes writing you an email than have a 2-minute phone conversation with you. But he can lock himself in his office, and he comes out and he says, these 3 prescribers you need to look at, and he's not been wrong. So we are at a point in Ohio, and many other states are following this model, where we're doing a pretty good job of identifying the prescribers that are fueling the continuing opioid epidemic. And I would give about anything to have had that 10 years before.
Dan, same question to you.
Well, if it relates to the current situation, I can't say there's information I didn't have, because we connected.
So your mission
But in our business, I will say, in consumer packaged goods space, connecting with our consumer is digital now. And the more we know about our consumers, who's buying, what they're buying, why they buy, the closer we can get to taking the message that's important to them and directing it to them. So it's really a micro segmentation of our consumer base. And then the deeper you know your consumer in that relationship with our products, there's things that we can do to constantly improve. I mean, we're a mini P&G. I mean, they're the big guys, but doing the same kind of things. So it's understanding our consumer in a deeper way, better than our competition, and delivering that message and that product and customizing that to that consumer to build from maybe a functional to an emotional relationship with that consumer and our brands.
Dr. Pinto, you mentioned not having the data in the beginning. None of us knew what was going on, but to Richard's point, was there some tool that could have helped through this process?
So just a clarification, Richard, you're asking in a general sense for the university as a whole?
I think, you could take it, in your position, based
Right.
on this experience, right? If we're looking over the horizon,
Right.
what would help as a leadership tool, drawing
Right.
out on that experience?
So I'll get to that in just a second, but just wanting, so digital transformation, which is actually what the provost, who's also here, is leading to some extent, is all about that, is how do we use, not just data analytics and sort of big data sets, but also Internet of Things and artificial intelligence in various aspects of the university's work. We start with the classroom. How can we advantage professors as they teach students and use these technologies to enhance the learning experience, identify students who are having problems early, identify what those problems are. So that feedback loop, so quicker, I think you know that better than I do. But at a university level, I would say, just generally speaking, the university is like running a small city. So, we have finance departments, HR departments, all kinds of operations in there. If I were to sort of pin one that would be important, I think modeling behavior is relatively sort of easy. We just have to get all the data, but it's about the predictive capability of that. That would be huge. So how can you take all that information and predict so you can help leaders make decisions more effectively? So it's predictive modeling rather than, I think that's what would serve us really, really well.
I think that's a new project for Digital Futures, Jen, perhaps. Anyone else have a question from the audience?
Thanks, Jay. Wim Portman, former board member of UC. Just wondering, for all three of you, how your personal leadership style may have changed in the last few years, having gone through the issues you've all gone through, and how it's kind of etched in your mind differently than it was beforehand.
Humility. So I'll say that it was a dose of, it was humbling. I think, to me, it's, I think we were going through a couple of decades of real prosperity, real progress, just as a society and certainly at the university. And then to think that a virus, which is 1,000th the size of the diameter of a human hair, average human hair, stopped 7 billion people in their tracks for almost 2 years. That's humbling. It's the lack of sort of a greater appreciation for the need to discover our environment, to investigate, to educate people to be able to do that. Secondly, I think it goes back to what I said earlier. It's the values that you have. I didn't quite see this in the context of a worldwide pandemic. So important for an organization to have a clear mission, a clear vision, and a clear set of values that binds it together. Have to work even harder to do that now, recognizing that there's so much more at stake in this, in doing that.
Thank you. Steve, you're a no-nonsense guy. You've seen some real heartache the last few years with this crisis. How's it changed you?
I think I've learned to be more patient with my staff and maybe with myself a little bit, but not much. But also be satisfied with incremental progress as opposed to, like, I think within my first month on the job, I had a list. We need to do this, 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 and this. And if I had my way, we would have just done it all at the same time and got it out of the way, and it's just, it creates too much of a demand on your staff to pull that off, I think. And so I think being satisfied with incremental progress, being more patient, but never being satisfied.
Thanks, Steve. Dan, as you touch these people's lives and you try to, give them hope, how's that changed you?
Well, I will say it really heightened the clarity of purpose, because you got a lot of confusion going on, and where do you go? And as a leader, you got to be very clear in communication and where you're going. I think it's really a time to give thanks, to take a step back in all this chaos, we are so blessed, and to give thanks and to take time to celebrate, some of those successes that you have, those little wins, because we tend to just keep pushing. But challenging time, and to really, to thank each and every one of the folks within our organization that really accomplished great stuff day in and day out for 2 years. And then the other piece, being a small company, we were doing this Zoom stuff. I'm the old guy, right? And you're trying to get 20 people on one of these calls, and shit, that's something that take 20 minutes, takes 2 hours. And you wonder what you accomplished. For us, it was important, that human connection of having everybody together. And it became very important when we could all get back together and work together, celebrate together, give thanks together.
Any other questions from the audience? All right. Look, we're coming up to the end of our time here, but I do want to ask one more question of each of you. And as we compare notes and we see, we all have these different types of crises. Again, some thrust upon us, some we are passionate about. What are the biggest lessons learned that you've had? And we'll start with you, Dan. So you gave these folks second chances, and clearly you haven't had roadblocks because you're so passionate about it, and you've convinced the folks internally this is the right thing to do. But it's still, scaling up a program like that's difficult. So what are the biggest lessons you've learned in doing something like this when you're really trying to make an impact in the community?
Well, what you see is everybody makes mistakes in their life, right? I always like to say we live life one foot on a banana peel and the other on ice. And we all fall down, but we have people around us to lift us up. Everybody deserves a second chance, a third chance. We don't give up on people unless they give up on themselves, and then we say we'll pray for you. But you can see greatness. Everybody's got greatness inside. And as a leader, it's your job to pull that out, provide those opportunities, give that encouragement, do all the right things. And to see people blossom is unbelievable.
Really appreciate that, Dan. Thank you. Steve, same question to you.
I think I have 3 points, and these are just quotes that I try to live by. You get what you measure, and I think we're doing a much better job of tracking things that matter, but certainly not good enough. Another thing is, if you know it, you own it. So I've talked about the OR system, and honestly, there's a lot of responsibility with having that information at your fingertips, because if you don't act on it, it's like you're responsible for the outcome. So that I take that to heart. And the others, don't don't take your, if there's a crisis, don't take your foot off the gas. You know, I mentioned 2014, there were 2,531 unintentional overdose deaths in Ohio. In 2020, there were 5,017. And it's just, I again, fentanyl, but I also think COVID isolation. You know, if any of you have companies that have workers, I encourage you to have naloxone on site. Naloxone's the life-saving inhaler that saves lives every day in this city and in our state. And at the Board of Pharmacy, we have worked tirelessly to remove any impediment to having it at hand. So I think that's it. Thanks.
It's a huge lesson, and it literally does save lives. Dr. Pinto, I'm going to ask the question a little bit differently for you. Hopefully we're through this past crisis. I'm sure that it could spring up anytime. But what lessons do you learn for the next one? Because the playbook, you probably had to rewrite the playbook this time. In the next crisis is going to look very different, I'm sure.
So I think I think I'd approach it with more confidence because of what I've learned is the ability of people to innovate, to adjust, and an understanding of their commitment to their work. That actually jumped out very clearly here. This could have been a complete catastrophe, but it wasn't because each one did their part. And so actually what I've learned is that I can approach these with more confidence. That doesn't mean lack of preparation. We certainly will look to see sort of where we could improve and how we reacted. But to me, I actually would say I'm optimistic. You know, this has been a lesson for us. And by the way, and Dr. Calhoun will I know, second this statement, don't assume it's gone away. The crisis is not over as yet. He keeps telling me that, and I believe him. He's the expert. But so it's not over yet, so I don't want to give that impression. We'll wait through the next winter cycle and see what happens. But I feel confident. I feel optimistic and confident. That's perhaps not what you expected to hear, but I just am so proud. I'm going to go back, so proud of the way individuals at our university, faculty and staff, rallied around and responded. Understand, we had to turn around 8,500 courses within 11 days to completely move a university of 47,000 students online. And this is not just your traditional lecture class. All right, you know the variety of experiences students have, and they did that. I was telling someone before this. It's like the sprint exercise you have in innovation. This was like a forced sprint for the entire community, and they responded. They came out with the ideas and the innovations that were necessary. So confidence in our ability to respond to the next one.
Confidence in the team, it looks like.
In the team
Yeah.
and the institution's ability to respond, yes.
That's fantastic. Well, look, I want to thank all of you for coming out again. We're going to do this more, I think, and I want to thank the panelists. Please give them a round of applause. They've really managed through some major issues. So thank you all.
Thank you, Jay. And before everybody gets up, we have a little something that we want to offer to the panelists on behalf of the Office of Research. A thank you for this. So, Margot, if you will help, I will take care of these. Sorry, Jay, but I got to do my boss first. Yes.
Job security.
There she is. But just a little token of our appreciation for your time and certainly an appreciation of all that you are doing.
Thank you.
As Jay said, our goal at the University of Cincinnati and the Office of Research as part of Digital Futures is to have more of these Flashpoint events just in this format. You should expect to get some sort of survey from us to get feedback on what worked, what didn't work, what would you like us to talk about, other things in the future that we could focus on as an institution, bring people together and have additional conversation. But Thank you all again for making this a priority in your day today. We sincerely appreciate it, and go enjoy the nice weather while we have it for a day. Yeah.